After Helen was pushed from upstairs by the billionaire, Henry rushed her to the hospital. Although Helen's life was not in danger, but the child in her womb was gone. Helen couldn't accept it and was heartbroken. Cold as ashes, she divorced Henry. After leaving the Hake family, along with the tragedy in her heart, she returned to her mother's house. Helen's mother, when she saw her daughter return with her luggage, was devastated. She hurriedly pulled her daughter to sit down and inquired about the situation. Helen was heartbroken to say her son and Henry divorced. The whole family was shocked after hearing the news. Under constant interrogation by Helen's mother, Helen speaks the truth. It was unbelievable for Helen's mother to learn the truth. Not only did he not comfort Helen, but on the contrary turned to her, pointing at her face and berating her for the sake of herself and her family. Every word she spoke was like knife blows to her heart. Helen burst into tears immediately. The father also did not feel grief for his daughter at all. Helen never thought about how when she had just divorced, not only did she not receive any comfort from her parents, on the contrary, it received even more insults. She vented her indignation as she chased Helen downstairs. Helen cried and pleaded anguishedly with her mother. Hearing these words, Helen was heartbroken as she watched her parents abandon her. Reluctantly, the luggage left the house. Helen didn't expect that in just one day, the important lives of the one she loves most and her family members abandon her like that. The thunder rumbled fiercely as if for her sake, to fight against injustice. She was such that on a cold rainy night abandoned by her parents. Helplessly, Helen had to ask her best friend Fiona for help. Seeing Helen's whole body soaked, her best friend couldn't stop being heartbroken. Eyes with Fiona's interest, Helen tells her all that happened to her. Then hugged Fiona and sobbed. She was careful that no matter who asked, she wouldn't say she was here, because at this time she just wanted peace to be alone. Fiona readily agreed. Helen, who is hurt by love and family affection, suddenly an idea came up. She wants a home of her own. Only then could Helen feel secure when she was most helpless. Not to roam the streets. Fiona also immediately understood what Helen meant. Just say her family hurt her. But Helen for herself just bought herself an apartment. The money accumulated on her body was also quickly used up. Her best friend felt that she was both young and talented like this. Suggested she should go get a job. Helen happily agreed. The next day Helen went to the magazine for an interview under the pseudonym Lana. The editor-in-chief was very pleased with Helen and did not stop praising her. Her entire resume didn't look at her directly. Although Helen hadn't worked in a long time, she had performed brilliantly. Very soon received the respect of the leaders. That day the leadership gave Helen an interview assignment. For her to interview Henry and declare Henry's married life in the magazine. She pulled sales for the newsroom. Perhaps the boss didn't know that Helen in front of him was Henry's ex-wife. The leader's words suddenly put Helen in a difficult position. Himself is directly hiding from Henry. How she could take the initiative to approach him was immediately rejected by Helen. Dear friend Fiona learned of the incident. To alleviate the embarrassment, she rushed out there to relieve herself. I suppose I know the billionaire Henry can go complete this interview task. The leader, when he knew that his subordinates knew the big man, was extremely happy. This also made Helen breathe a sigh of relief. The next night, Helen kept waiting for her best friend to return from the interview. Even though she still remembered Henry in her heart. But outwardly she pretended she didn't care in the slightest. Unexpectedly, her best friend untied the knots. When Helen heard that Henry still remembered her, inwardly he was also chuckling. Her best friend told her about the status of the interview. Helen pretended she didn't care. The content of the interview was as predicted by her. On the road to success, you can write about everything, but you can't mention marriage even one word. Her best friend also noticed that Henry cared deeply about Helen. Without waiting for her best friend to finish speaking, Helen gave the order to send off the guests. On the other side, Henry returned home. Before, no matter how late he came back, there was always a light in the house waiting for him to return. But today in the house moved to an unusual cold. Henry turned on the light. Dismayed to sit down, he picked up the photo album and looked at his and Helen's wedding photos. The heart could not contain the suffering, shed tears. Unexpectedly, the billionaire who could shake the heavens and the earth was also sad because of love. Everywhere in the room was filled with sweet memories of the two. Warm images had always been so beautiful, but now it was all ephemeral. Henry just walked up the stairs. Head unconsciously remembers the desperate scene when Helen falls down the stairs. Henry couldn't face what had happened in the past. And in anger, he tore down all the paintings on the walls. He sat mournfully on the stairs. Neither committed nor content with this ending. So he picked up the phone and called Helen's house. Peter takes the call and says to Henry, the mother kicked her out of the house. He himself did not know where she had gone. Hearing this, Henry immediately rushed out of the house to find Helen. He drove around looking for Helen's tracks. But searching all night could not find her either. Henry returned to the company but had no mind to care about the job. He couldn't stop staring at Helen's picture. Now he suddenly thought of Fiona. Guessed that Helen was definitely at her place. He quickly called her. After Fiona got the call, hearing indeed Henry's voice, she hurriedly gestured to Helen. Helen didn't want to see Henry again. She told Fiona not to tell her that she had seen her. So Fiona arbitrarily found an excuse to tell Henry. Henry was relentlessly desperate. He accepted his mother's offer and decided to move back home. But he asked Cindy to customize a new wedding photo. Secret preparation hangs in his own room. Unexpectedly, Mrs. Herrick has discovered. Mrs. Herrick knows that her son has not forgotten his ex-wife. This time it was really too hasty. Mrs. Herrick chattered endlessly. Make everyone in the house attracted. She thought her son was crazy. What kind of lover in the world after a divorce hangs wedding photos of himself and his ex-wife in the house? How can you find a lover? Henry finished hearing this, not caring for the slightest while holding the picture as he prepared to go upstairs. She never thought her son would be so angry about his ex-wife and himself. She was so angry that she died on the spot. This frightened Henry. Fortunately, his mother did not encounter anything serious. Henry begged his mother for forgiveness, and his sister was also by his side to speak for his brother. After hearing Mrs. Herrick softened his heart immediately. They finally reached a verbal agreement. The photo can be hung up, but it is up to him to find a girlfriend and get married. Henry had no choice but to agree. And the next day, his sister introduced him to Tiffany, the best student in the law school. Henry wants to ruin this eye viewing. He offers to take Tiffany on a tour of his bedroom. To let her know it's hard to back off, so that the people in the house won't blame him. As soon as Tiffany walked in the door, she saw a large wedding photo hanging on the wall. Normal girls would run away when they saw it. But the girl in front of him was different. She laughed slightly, as if she had seen through Henry's entire interiority. Moreover, she complimented Henry's ex-wife on being very beautiful. Henry found that Tiffany was extremely calm. So try to probe her again. Said his mother thought this picture shouldn't be hanging here. Tiffany said to Henry again. Henry heard this, and immediately looked at the girl in front of him with different eyes. Tiffany's expression also made Mrs. Herrick extremely pleased. He told Henry to take her home. Tiffany reached the stairs. Henry said she should know how hard it was to back down. After getting off, lit a cigarette. And told her that he was the one who had once been married. He still couldn't forget his ex-wife. Henry, after listening to Tiffany speak for a moment, dumbfounded for a moment. Then Tiffany went to Henry's family every 3 meals. Often bringing various gifts for the whole family. Young and old, big and small. Temporary hard work will pay off. She through hard work succeeded in winning the favor of Henry's family. But Henry avoided her. When Mrs. Herrick found out about her and said she liked Tiffany, Mr. Herrick repeatedly complimented her. Henry hadn't expected that Tiffany would take it upon herself to strike first. By acquiring his parents first. Henry immediately admired Tiffany. The patient's wife took this opportunity on the grounds that her health was no longer good. May her son and Tiffany get married soon. The filial son Henry did not want his mother's body to be in any trouble. So he agreed to his mother's arrangement after the Mid-Autumn Festival. Mrs. Herrick, in order to prevent his son from swallowing his words, suggested that he write a written statement. Henry heard his mother's words. Inevitably feeling heartbroken. Finally he signed his name. At the same time Helen, because of the excellence of her work, was also madly pursued by Brian's lawyer. But Helen felt no interest in him at all. So she rejected Brian. Just pretend you're a cocky woman. Brian heard this and was astonished. Helen thinks the conditions she says will be able to cause her opponent to withdraw despite the difficulties. Unexpectedly, this rich and powerful lawyer actually put 30 lakhs of cash on top of Helen's desk and confessed to her in front of everyone. Brian's actions amazed everyone. Helen suddenly panicked. She shamelessly pulled Brian out. Then give him back 30 lakhs. Once again expressing that he did not want their relationship to go too far. Unexpectedly, this act on the contrary further stimulated Brian to want to pursue her. Helen also did not know how to do it later. Since then Brian has always persisted in sending her flowers every day. Helen repeatedly remained unmoved. But Brian persisted in not giving up to meet her. Under his relentless clinging, Helen finally agreed to go with him to dinner with his friends. And Brian was delighted. Helen arrived at the restaurant expectantly. And it was unbelievable that the person who killed her like a ghost was also there. Henry saw Helen finish and suddenly held back. The person he thought about day and night was right in front of him.